colorblind approaches not only allow us to avoid racism by ignoring someone's blackness or brownness, it also allows us to avoid racism by ignoring our own whiteness. That's right, we have a race too. What does it mean? What's its significance? Is it anything more to us than a box we check off on forms? On today's episode of Bro Talks Race. Today I'm at Memorial Lake State Park, which is located primarily in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, and which is surrounded by a National Guard training center. The state park is 230 acres. The lake itself takes up 85 of those acres. In episode 1, I observed that we white folks tend to discount the significance of our own race and the race of those around us. However, it might seem counterintuitive to us, but the actual way to move toward racial justice in this country is just the opposite. It's to be acutely aware of those very things. But most of us aren't aware. We think we shouldn't be. And so we distance ourselves from race using things like the colorblind approach I talked about in episode 2. At that time, I concluded that that approach harms people of color and supposed that it was something we learned in childhood. Today I'm going to start to reflect upon what embracing that approach might say about white people. And that is going to lead us into our very new, very related topic of white identity. So, let's go. The usual defense of white people taking a colorblind approach to race is that ignoring the race of others allows us to treat them equally, or not to discriminate. The goal of treating people equally is of course a good thing and says something positive about white people. But I'm concerned about the reasoning. Why must we ignore race to accomplish those things? To my ears, the people who require us to have a colorblind approach to other people have a very pessimistic view of our own race. It clearly implies that the most likely outcome of white people acknowledging the race of others is a bad one, that we will treat them poorly. That's ridiculous. Pitiful, actually. We can do better than that. Specifically, we can both acknowledge the race of the people around us and treat them well. I'll even take it a step further. We can acknowledge the race of the people around us and that their race holds some significance and treat them well. And if I'm right, and we can do those things, haven't we rendered the colorblind approach completely unnecessary? I think so. But we do have some work ahead of us, because if we are, for example, going to see black people as black people, that means we also need to see white people as white people. That's right, part of being color aware means seeing ourselves not just as a person, but as a white person. I realize that for some of us, that is a radical idea. In fact, those folks probably had a problem with me in the first minute of the first episode when I identified my target audience as white people. And ever since then, they probably groaned every time I made any kind of a generalization about white people. Why? We aren't used to being identified as a group, addressed as a group. It particularly makes us uncomfortable when it's implied that we share anything in common with each other simply based on our shared race. I think we've never considered that such an exercise could have any value. We have a dysfunctional relationship with our race. Some of us have crowned our race the best, others don't see it at all, or at least reject the idea that it has any significance. Look, we simply cannot allow white supremacists and white nationalists to be the only white people who are talking about white identity. Reasonable folks like us need to be considering what it means to be white, too. We have allowed them to dominate the conversation for far too long, and it's been quite damaging. to the point where we think the only possible reason we would consider ourselves as a group would be to align ourselves against another racial group, and that is simply not the case. Identity is complex, and I'm asking us to consider the identity of an entire race of people. And so today we have only scratched the surface of what there is to discover. We're entering some interesting, difficult territory. Thank you for watching White Identity Part 1. We have a lot to talk about. Part 2, by the way, will not be next. Part 2 will be later in the series. Instead, what I'd like you to do going forward is, for each episode of Road Talks Race you watch, walk away from it and think to yourself, how has this topic helped me better understand white identity in the United States? Take care. I'll see you soon.